Last week, Lindsay, you hosted a bunch of people from the Netherlands in California for a mobility conference. But today, Lindsay, you have another guest with us, Stefan Burr, who is an American, but he lives in the Netherlands and he's a traffic engineer and traffic planner and biker. And we also have Sully Israel, who is a traffic planner in Los Angeles. So we have kind of a four group today, and we want to discuss a little bit of what Stefan, you have put online on your channel, Build the Lanes, about throughput of cars. So, Stefan Burr, Sully Israel, and as always, Lindsay Sturman, welcome to Bike Talk.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you.
for having all of us on. It's a big
Yeah.
pleasure for us.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, I saw this video that you talked about throughput of cars. Could you explain a little bit about what that is and what you're talking about in your video?
Yes, so if in case anyone hasn't seen that video yet, so I produced a video a couple of months ago talking about the nature of traffic flow inside of urbanized areas. And the point that I really tried to drive home is that the lane capacity of a road is more or less completely irrelevant when you enter a city area. And that's because in the urbanized area, you have a lot of stop and go traffic, which means that the bottleneck of this traffic system is not going to be the lane, but it's going to be the intersection itself. And what you'll find is that when you do these traffic measurements, the intersection will tap out well before the theoretical lane capacity is reached. It's so unequal, it's almost ridiculous to the point where an intersection is maybe has a third of the efficiency that the capacity of a lane has.
So hold on. When an intersection taps out, you mean when an intersection gets so clogged up that you have to wait two or three lights to get through the intersection? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the
Okay.
the maximum amount of cars that an intersection will move.
Okay.
So there's
Can
two ways you can kind of look at it without getting too deep into the traffic engineering specifics. You can look into the amount of traffic that accumulates in a certain direction, or you can look at how many cars are moved per hour from a certain direction. So, for example, when you are driving up to the intersection, you wait and you just measure how many cars are coming from this road per hour. And you'll find that an intersection is massively more inefficient than a free flow lane itself is. So, what we're essentially doing in cities is that we are spending tens of millions of dollars to widen the road to add virtually no effective throughput capacity to the system. So cities are literally farting away money uh, and not solving the fundamental problem they claim to care about, which
Wow.
is just something that should upset everybody, even if you're a car head.
Can you talk us through that again? Because it sounds like there's two issues that mess up an intersection. It feels like it's the complexity and people just getting stuck behind a light. Can you kind of
Yes.
take that apart for us?
What's nice about this topic is that it's very easy to study and it's easy to replicate the results. So something I encouraged people to do in my video was to go to one of the biggest intersections they could find inside of a city. And I just asked them, hey, stand on the north leg of it and just count how many cars are moving per hour. And you can count how many cars are coming. You'll find that it's most times 1,400 vehicles an hour, 1,500 vehicles per hour, but the theoretical lane capacity is 1,800 vehicles per hour. And unless and now if you have an intersection that's say maybe 6 lanes in each direction, you might be able to get above that. But it's just how the intersection itself works is that it's just by its nature very inefficient because cars are stopped for such a long period of time that the amount of cars you're going to be able to move per hour is going to be fundamentally limited. But it basically all comes back to how much red light time you have in a signal. So more or less, the longer you have cars waiting, the less efficient it's going to be.
Right.
So when you have,
I was going to say the reason I ride a bike is because I can't stand sitting in my car at a red light.
yeah, yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing, and that's something you don't really notice until you start having real mobility professionals running the city, is that the the throughput capacity is going to be limited by the worst bottleneck in the city, so the least efficient intersection. But that also goes for speed as well. So you'll find more or less that in most urbanized areas that the most average, highest average speed you can get is going to be just a bit above 30 miles per hour because it's not dependent on the speed limit sign itself. It's going to be dependent on, well, how long are you stuck at the red light for? So even if you're gunning at 50 miles per hour between intersections, that's great. But with the amount of time you wait at the intersection itself, you're always going to average out to around 30 miles per hour, more or less, which raises the other interesting question of, well, why are we making our roads so dangerous with 50 mile per hour roads when we could just have 30 miles per hour and the result is literally the same, except there's just way fewer crashes and way fewer deaths.
Yeah,
In
people
LA,
just
it's
don't seem
20.
to understand that. Sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
Yeah, LA is 20 miles an hour. So there's no reason to not just do 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Right.
And but that always, I think it always comes back to, and this is something I like to hammer on my channel, is asking engineers and planners and also advocates, what do you want from this road? There's a couple of things we can aim for, but generally people have to choose between two things right away, which is, do you want this place to be for flow or do you want to be for access? And generally, when you make something better for flow, it gets worse for access and vice versa. So you can make a road very safe and efficient for flow, or you can make it very safe and efficient for access. But you can't really do both at the same time. But to get there, you kind of have to make that decision at a network level well ahead of time. This is kind of where I think a lot of traffic engineering professionals in the US kind of go wrong, is that they're not looking really at it from a network perspective, and they just try to look at it locally. And for example, they might see some problematic intersection and think, oh, we have to make this road wider here so we can store more cars per hour. We're gonna maybe paint a bike lane right next to it. And they come up with this kind of nice, very localized geometric design, but it more or less does nothing to change the reality in Los Angeles. And that's why I argue on my channel. I wrote an article about this, that America doesn't have a lot of true transportation engineers because
Mm.
the nobody's looking at it from that level. And we instead what we have are a lot of civil engineers, which we need, of course. And they've just only taken a couple of classes in mobility itself, and just enough to kind of know how to do the civil engineering work on roads or the civil engineering work for intersections. But we don't have a lot of people who can take a step back and ask the really important questions that you need to get a good mobility system to even begin with.
Well, one way to think about it, this is like I suddenly started thinking about stroads in that there's two kinds of stroads. There's urban stroad and a suburban stroad. And we always talk about a suburban stroad, which is, I mean, we know what it is. It's 6, 8 lanes with like, Costco and a CVS and,
Yes.
huge parking lots, right? But an
Mm.
urban stroad is what we've done to LA. So we've taken streets, right? Like Beverly, Melrose that have sweet, fountain. It has residential homes and it has a bunch of small shops, and we've tried to turn it into a freeway. We've taken all of our sweet streets and turned them into freeway. So there are a street that's we're trying to make it a road. So now
Yeah.
nothing works.
Yeah, and that's kind of the stroad is what we would define in the Netherlands we call it a Grijzeweg or a gray path. And that's when
Gesundheit.
arguing it's trying to combine the access functions and the throughput functions, and they fundamentally erode each other at the same time. And that's also like when I made my video about the throughput that Taylor mentioned, it's this road called Douglas Boulevard in Roseville, and it's also your typical suburban stroad. It's 6 lanes wide, 3 lanes on each side. And it has an average travel speed of 32 miles per hour. And it has, if you do traffic measurements along the whole corridor at peak hour, it's around 17 to 1800 vehicles per hour, which is how much a single 30 mile per hour lane can use. So quite inefficient use of money and
Right.
space.
Well, I want to ask you about that because so many of the roads that Lindsay was just talking about are 4 lane roads, meaning 2 lanes in each direction. And partly what we're struggling with in Los Angeles, and I think in a lot of American cities, is this idea of, you know, do we do a road diet and create some space for multimodal transportation choices, scooters or wheelchairs or bicycles. But the pushback we get all the time is that will clog up traffic even more. And it sounds like you're saying maybe it won't.
I mean, it definitely might not. Again, you first have to just tell people, okay, this is what we want this road to do. So if for this project you cited, you said, okay, we want to move as much cars as possible on this road. Completely fair goal. That depends much more on the network design than the local design. So what does that mean? That means you need to minimize the amount of stop and go. So, and a kind of cool thing about making roads narrow is that they're much less dangerous to turn left onto. So you guys know when you're on a small suburban street and you want to turn onto one of these big 5 or 6 lane roads in Los Angeles, and it's really stressful and it takes a while because you have to drive across multiple lanes at the same time, and often you need a signal just to do it. Well, when you downgrade to a road that's just a single lane each direction, that becomes very easy. So in the case where you're talking about, if you say, hey, I want this road to be for flow, you can narrow that road up because we already know that that narrow road has the same throughput flow as this giant 6 lane road has. Because you make it narrow, you can remove a lot of the signals along that because it makes turning onto it significantly easier. And then because you've made these kind of big picture decisions ahead of time about caring about flow, well, what are you going to do with all that space with those extra 3 or 4 lanes that you just got rid of? I'm thinking bus lane, scooter lane, bike lane, extra parking, extra greenery, wider sidewalks. And this is why I hammer so much on the intersection topic, because if we can get that part right, it causes a lot of other things to kind of fall into place. Because when you realize where the bottlenecks are, it makes reassigning road space to other uses a lot easier.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
We assume a lane handles 1900 cars per hour, but you're saying it's 1400 or it's 500. I think I'm mixing up these numbers.
So the 18, you guys may have seen some federal highway capacity manuals. Is the figure is 1800 vehicles per hour, and that makes a couple of assumptions. That assumes that cars are perfectly following each other at 2 seconds following distance apart. But the problem is that the moment you have stop and go traffic, that number goes out of the window because you no longer have free flow traffic, and then your throughput capacity is the intersection itself. So this is kind of why in the Netherlands they don't ever really discuss flow capacity in urban areas, because it's going to ultimately depend on every intersection. Every intersection is a little bit different. So you just have to go into the city and figure out, okay, on this road, what's the least efficient intersection? And that's going to be your capacity for the whole corridor. And so for the example I talked about in my video, Douglas, I found that the least efficient intersection on that corridor, I believe, was around 1200 vehicles per hour, which for Douglas Boulevard makes that the effective capacity of the whole corridor.
Is that per lane or per corridor?
For that travel direction. So everybody driving, say, in the north direction, if you're planning to stay in Douglas the entire time, then yeah, it would be approximately 1200 vehicles per hour. Think of it like a water pipe. And you have a throttle somewhere in that pipe that's only going to let a certain amount of volume through. I mean, it doesn't matter how much wider you make the pipe before or afterwards. The amount of water that pipe is going to be able to move through is going to be determined by that specific bottleneck.
So you could have 3 lanes going, right, that have 1800 per lane, but you get to the intersection and all 3 lanes collapse into 1400 cars per hour. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that
or each lane collapses.
I'm saying forget about the lane itself. Zoom up the satellite view, and then just see how many cars are managing to cross straight across the intersection, and that's your new capacity.
And
So
that's 1400.
It depends on the intersection.
But you found that the worst intersection was 1400.
In my own study, yeah. For example, along Douglas Boulevard, but it could be in Los Angeles along a specific road you're interested in. that the worst intersection only moves 600 vehicles per hour,
Right.
just as an example. Well, then your effective capacity of that entire road is 600 vehicles per hour. There's two ways to measure it. You can just stand on a road and you can see how all the traffic, so the traffic driving across the intersection, but also the turning traffic, how much accumulates in a specific direction, or what we're talking about now, which is how many cars just get across per hour.
So this has huge implications to
Yes, it
streets like
does.
Fountain, because even if it's going to basically come down to one lane. Is that like
Yeah.
3 lanes basically squeeze into one lane every which way you splice it? And am I right that it's the complexity of the intersection or just the stop and go of it all or both?
It's both. Um,
Okay.
and this is kind of the problem when you build multi-lane roads in every direction. So if you make it where every road in Los Angeles is, for example, 4 lanes, well, there's very few ways to safely manage that except building a signalized intersection. So paradoxically, what you've done is by trying to make every road as effective and efficient as possible for flow traffic, you've actually slowed it down
Oh,
because you
wow.
now have to build a signal in at every intersection and you have to come to a full stop at every intersection. And
Right.
it's much more efficient to instead decide, okay, these are our flow roads. These are built for traffic flow, like a liquid, and these other areas are built for access, and they're not going to be efficient for traffic. And what we've seen in countries that do that, you spend a lot less money and you use a lot less space, and there's a lot less maintenance to keep that system going.
Sully,
Um,
did you want to ask something?
yes, to bring this home and into context for people in the LA area, the Move Culver City, the contentious Move Culver City project is a perfect example of what we've been talking about,
I'm gonna
where
bring
they
that up
took
on Google
a
Maps.
4-lane road and narrowed it to 1 lane in each direction in order to promote access because it's the main street in their downtown, right? And so they don't want it to be a freeway. And I talked to the former mayor of Culver City. I ran into him at an event a few nights ago, and I said, the biggest complaint you saw was people were saying that once it was narrowed, they were slowed down. I said, how much were they actually slowed down? He said they measured during peak hours the maximum delay compared to 4 lanes compared to 2 lanes was a little less than 2 minutes. So an entire lane wasn't even worth 2 minutes, basically.
Right.
But that was enough, especially when you're in a car. And he said, I don't even know if people know. It looks like it's more congested as well because
Do
people
you
are
know the name of the do you know the name of the road in Culver City that they're talking about? I can
Washington, I believe, right?
Yeah, I
Culver
think it is
City.
Washington.
Washington in Culver City. If you look up the Culver Steps, it's the street right outside. And now they're rewidening it. Um, and so, I think there's also a perception of traffic, right? If there's 2 lanes of traffic, like Stefan said, it might still average out to 30, but it looks like it's faster in between intersections. But when you put those people into 1 lane, it looks slower, but really it's just about the same.
Right.
And so yeah, and the city citizens were so angry that they got a new council who tore out the multi-million-dollar project to narrow the road in the first place.
Right.
But see, this is a kind of situation you could avoid with good transportation engineering because where's everyone getting stuck on Washington Boulevard?
That's an oxymoron, isn't it? At least in Los Angeles, good transportation engineering.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, Los Angeles is a case study of what you don't
Right.
want to do. Like, I love to. Sorry to anyone listening from LA. I do like to kind of bash on the roads in LA on my channel. But when I'm driving out here is on Culver City on Washington Boulevard, these car drivers, where they're getting stuck and where they're getting passed by cyclists and they're getting road rage from that. That's still at the intersection itself. Now, this kind of brings up an interesting point because when you take away a lane, right, and you repurpose it to, say, cyclists or any other use, that's never a problem until you get to the intersection itself. Because when you get to the intersection itself, that's where cars can like back up a bit. And in the Netherlands, what we do is we calculate, hey, what are the length of the queues going to be? And that's how, so when we come to the intersection itself, you will quite often see that that 1 lane then flares out to 3 or 4 lanes. So you'll have, say, two straight through lanes, a left turn lane, and then a right turn lane. But what we do is that we're able to move most of those cars in the queue all in one signalized phase. So even though we're adding a cycle lane, because we're still flaring out at the intersection itself, we avoid that whole disadvantage to drivers completely. And I think what's kind of happening in Washington Boulevard, looking at it briefly, is that it's a road that's 2 or 3 lanes just straight shot the entire way. And I guess when you remove an entire lane at the intersection itself, then you're causing some backup at the intersection itself, and that's maybe where the problem comes from. But you can remove that problem entirely by just narrowing Washington Boulevard so you can remove a lot of those unnecessary signals. And then at the intersection itself, when you actually need one, well, if you have a bit of backup, the amount of time you've saved by removing those other intersections more than makes up for it. So the root cause of this is the city not deciding what they want Washington Boulevard to be for. Do they want it to be for flow, or do they want it to be for access? And that's the root cause of all of these problems. And the argument about taking a lane away from traffic, giving it to bikes, they're all symptoms of that. It's just symptoms of non-existent traffic planning.
Yeah,
And
I'm not sure that the leaders of Culver City would be able to answer the question of whether they want a road or a street. I think they would say, we want both. And that goes right back to what you're saying. That's the problem. It can't handle both.
Yeah. But what you're going to end up is what is right now, which is something that has the throughput of a single in each direction and a 30-mile-per-hour road, but you've built something 5 times wider than that. And
Right.
well, poor people of Los Angeles have to pay to maintain that. And this is also then another question you have to hit on is that when did we decide that some delay is a bad thing? Like, the amount of delay that traffic encounters, well, that's something to think about, but it's not necessarily more important than everything else. Like, why should we have to demolish the entire city just to reduce commute times by 2 minutes? And that's something um, that's one reason why in the Netherlands, the engineering manuals for roads are split up between urban and rural, because the assumptions in an urban area is, well, hey, traffic is something to think about in the city, but there's all these other things we have to think about, like, air quality, pedestrian safety, uh, public gathering spaces. We have to balance all those things with each other. And it's not that, traffic isn't important, but it's a much more complex environment. And we can't just say we're going to focus on this one variable completely at the expense of everything else. So in the city I work in, Harlem, it was built in the 1200s AD. Like they didn't have modern traffic engineering practices. So there are some problems we have from that. For example, we don't have a proper ring road around the city. So Harlem just has some chronic traffic problems, but the city has decided, you know what? This is the reality of living in Harlem. We're not going to bulldoze half of the buildings here just to make car drivers' lives easier. If you don't like it, take the bus, take the train, take the bicycle. It's actually maybe a plug-in. I work for the city of Harlem, and we're trying to make 90% of all trips inside the city that are under 3 kilometers to be by bicycle or to be by public transit. So, and that's kind of the other thing is like when you start thinking about mobility engineering, is that if you run up against all these constraints inside the city where you can't make things more efficient for cars, well, your job as a mobility engineer doesn't end. Well, you have to think, okay, how else can I move people per hour? Not cars per hour, people per hour. And that's where you start thinking about bicycle lanes, public transit, wider sidewalks. And you can actually solve the problem. It's that you have to choose a different mode of transportation.
That also, by the way, connects back to Move Culver City because the lane they took away, quote unquote, they made a bus only lane. And what's so interesting to think about when you think about efficiency and how many people you're moving per hour, most of the time the bus only lane appears empty, right? Because it's not full of cars. But when a single bus goes by, that's 40 feet long. If it's full of people, which by the way, transit ridership went up, I think like 100%. When that bus goes by, it's carried by as many people as, most people, by the way, are alone in their car. So we could say like 40 cars, right? In 40 feet, they got as many people down that lane as, hundreds of feet of cars would. And so it looks like, looking at it, you're like, wow, this lane is empty. But every time a bus goes by, it's actually more people than are in their cars. So it's actually far more efficient use of space.
Right.
Yeah. That's a thing is that in places that have constrained space, we say, look, we don't have enough space to give it all to the least efficient mode of transportation. Like
Right.
when we have space constraints, that's actually what makes us reduce car lanes and say, hey, we have to move people per hour. So that's exactly why we need a bus lane. If we don't have these giant right of ways where we can convert the entire where we can give 200 feet in either direction away to asphalt. But yeah, I would say that the best way to measure intersection efficiency is people per hour over the physical area. So people per hour per square meter. I'm getting a little technical there. Sorry, guys. But
No.
No,
the
but
idea
this
is that
it's
yeah.
it speaks to the math of cities, and I believe Lewis Mumford in the 60s did some math calculations. The cars just literally don't fit. But if they don't fit, then you're stuck in Carmageddon, with all the climate and air quality that comes out of that, or you have to fix the problem. And the problem is fixed through, the things you just said. Is it bike lanes? Is it a bus lane? Is it building 15-minute cities where people just live where they work and can do everything by bike and walking? So I think this math is really important for us to understand, because I think that we're living in a delusion that somehow we can fit these cars through the system, and what you're saying very clearly is we can't. And I just wonder if there's formal math on this.
Oh, no, there absolutely is, and again, you can measure the things I'm talking about yourself whenever you want to do a study. If you guys want an example of a city doing things right, I'll tell people. I love to tell people about what Austin's doing, because Austin actually put out a great infographic where they more or less summarized what I was talking about. And they said, yeah, the intersection throughput tends to be around a third of a free flow lane. That's one reason why Austin, because they have this big picture, they've been able to do a lot of great work over there because they understand where the constraints and the whole traffic system are, and when there's just wasted space, they give it to other uses. And I haven't seen that many cities who have made as much progress as Austin has. So when people ask me about, like, okay, you're in the Netherlands, is there hope for the US? I'm like, absolutely. If a city in Texas, can really like get their act together, and why can't anybody else?
Why can't California?
But
Yeah.
Stefan, let me ask you this. On the show, on Bike Talk, we've been talking a lot about Toronto, that the
Mm.
premier of Ontario is threatening to take out some very successful bike lanes in Toronto. It's also happening in Denver. They are taking out bike lanes. It happened in Culver City, as Soli said. Um, if you show up at a neighborhood meeting or a city council meeting, how do you articulate in 2 minutes that you're given to speak your ideas here, that the throughput of a Fountain Avenue or a Washington Avenue or in any avenue in any city is better when you have less space for cars and more space for multimodal transportation?
I take two pictures. One is a road in the Netherlands, close to where I live, called the N200 road. Close to where I live, it's a single lane in each direction. And then I show them a picture of Douglas Boulevard, and I've measured the traffic volumes on both. And I say, hey, I always love talking about, like the differences between the Netherlands and the US, but you know what these two roads have in common? They have the same throughput capacity. They move similar amounts of vehicles per hour. And one is one lane in each direction, one is 3 or 4 lanes in each direction, and that gets them curious and say, well, why is that? And I say, well, I'm so glad you asked. So then you see this intersection over here. I don't try to present myself necessarily as a bike person. I tell people I went to the Netherlands because I wanted to learn how to be a transportation engineer. I really wanted to learn how to build good mobility systems, and that means moving everybody well, including cars. And that's why, when I talk about these solutions, I try to present in a way of like, it's not really about just punishing car drivers. It's just about moving everybody better. And when I kind of explain it to them, kind of like that, instead of because I think when some people see these projects, they think about like from a cultural war perspective, where they're like bikes versus cars,
Totally.
and they're like, it's a zero sum game. If I get space taken away from me, it's better for them, but it's bad for me. And then when I try to explain it more like this, they realize like, hey, it's not necessarily bad for me. And then the second thing I like to show them, this is where I put on my Strong Towns hat. I don't know if you guys know that organization or not, is
Sure.
show them the bill. Say, like, hey, this is how much this is going to cost you. Like these things have costs. You have to pay for this. It's paid for by your property taxes. I mean, the most common complaint I hear about California is that, hey, taxes are too high. And I ask them, hey, you want to know the best way to give yourself a tax break is make your road half as wide and you can still have the same capacity. And so at the end of the day, I think it's like money talks. And I think that if you just explain to people that it's in their own best interest for this kind of thing, so instead of just saying it's good for bikes, I take it from the perspective it's good for everybody, and it's
Great.
also cheaper for you.
Great. Great.
I feel like the problem in America is that we do our bike lanes so poorly and we don't do bus lanes. So it doesn't work. So we can't imagine a world like the Netherlands where it does work. And, you know, one of the things we talk about a lot is how do you do demonstration projects so people can experience it? And actually, I'm part of a group that is putting together a field study trip to the Netherlands because so elected officials in Southern California can experience biking as a way of, you know, getting to work. And, you know, that they, in our heads, it's like, you know, it's the shoes you wear, it's whether you have to take a shower, you know, can you get a shower at work? It's the weather, it's none of these things. It's that bad bike lanes don't scale and good bike lanes always scale.
Right.
Yeah, and it's difficult because transportation engineering begins at the network level, and civil engineering starts kind of at the geometric level. And if you want to get an effective transportation concept, you're going to have to cover more ground than is a single intersection or a single block. You're going to have to look at a corridor of maybe, you know, 6 to 8 intersections, and that's difficult to do. But when people ask me about it, I tell them that's what you want to aim for. And when Sully visited me in the Netherlands, like something I try to show him when there's a street in Harlem called Kroonjestraat. And one reason I like to show it to people when they visit to me is I try to show them, like, you know, the Netherlands isn't so different from the US. Like all these complaints you hear about parking, we have the exact same complaints here. People here, you know, argue just as much about parking as we do in the United States. And there's a shopping street in North Harlem that's lined up by shops, and we tried to block it off the cars, but the shop owners didn't want it. And that maybe sounds like a conversation in Los Angeles, but it also
Totally.
happens here in the Netherlands. But yeah, again, you have the same problem in the world, no matter where you go.
But
It's
Stefan, tell us the solution that on that street though.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Well, Kroonjestraat or Kronje Street is a shopping street, and this is like kind of where you get into history a little bit. And the interesting thing is that for most of human history, more traffic down the street used to mean more business because what happened was before the 1900s, all traffic, you know, if you forget about that brief invention of trains, you know, sometime in the 1800s, all traffic moved at around 10 to 15 miles per hour. People were walking, people were in carriages, or some version of that. So because traffic moved so slowly, the kind of the activities of socializing and shopping and traveling over there was a bit of an overlap there. Like they weren't necessarily so mutually exclusive. And what kind of happened over time was like because we advanced so much technologically, we invented high-speed travel. And what that ended up meaning is that for this 1% of human history we live in right now, by letting traffic move so quickly through an area, that it's no longer true that more traffic down a street necessarily means more business. In fact, it can mean less because high traffic can make a place really unpleasant and dangerous to be in. And now we have this brand new scientific field, mobility, where we have to figure out how do we handle this. We have to start thinking about restricting different kinds of traffic. And so on Crony Street, what we have to do is we have to go against 99% of human history and explain to shop owners saying, hey, I understand why you feel like you're going to lose your business if we close this area off to cars. But if you look at all the people who drive through the street, maybe 3 or 4% of them get out and park and go shopping. You know, they're not benefiting you by driving through here. So the solution that Sully was asking about is that we're trying to close it off to cars and make it pedestrianized. But that's a bit of it's a political problem, but we
Sure.
also have that even in places like the Netherlands.
Right. Well, that, Lindsay, brings up Westwood Boulevard, which is what you talk about all the time with LCI. You know, Westwood Boulevard, a major north-south street in Los Angeles, is dying because of all the car traffic. And your idea, Lindsay, is to really slow that car traffic down and make it much more of a livable street in a livable area that brings back shops.
Yeah, I think we have 50% vacancy rate in our retail in LA. And Westwood's interesting because it's a mile and a half and it tees into a university that already has a culture of walking, a little bit of biking, and it has a freeway about 7 blocks away. So
Right.
the only traffic on the street is spillover traffic. So it's sort of, you know, screams for I think it could be incredible as, you know, one lane in each direction. It sounds like, Stefan, you would say it's not going to affect the throughput, and just slowing it down and then adding housing, because if it was a sweet street that teed into an incredible university campus with one of the biggest medical centers in the city and one of our best historic villages, you know, it would be a pretty amazing place to live. And it
Right.
also touches 2 high-quality transit lines on our metro, the incoming Purple Line, which it's not called that anymore,
E-line.
D line and the E line.
Right.
But what do you
I,
think, Stefan? Do you want to take a look at it?
I would also like to bring up a point with Westwood, which is we've been talking very heavy on the transportation side, but as a planner, I will also bring up the land use side. And Stefan has also told me that they're a chicken and egg thing. And I think that transportation land use conundrum of Los Angeles is that we decided the only commercial corridors, the only streets that were allowed to have businesses on them are also are the streets that need to maximize throughput. So there are plenty of quiet streets in Los Angeles in our neighborhoods, but they're not allowed to have businesses on them. And the loud streets can only have businesses on them and really not housing, which is how you end up with Westwood Boulevard, where
It's a
it's
really
The
interesting.
opposite of what you
Right.
want. Yeah.
And also,
why
while
don't you
we're
tell me where to
letting
stop,
Stefan
please?
set that up, I think we have to say that Paul Koretz, who was the city council member for this district 5 years ago, wouldn't even do a study of whether bike lanes worked on Westwood Boulevard. The neighbors were so angry about the idea of a bike lane that the city council member just said, "Well, we're not even going to study it." That's how serious we are about not making this a better street.
And if you think about like, you know, what are the most popular areas in European cities when you go to visit them? They're the downtowns or the places with the history, the places that are completely pedestrianized,
Mhm.
right? And what we've done is that we've made these places, like for example in Harlem, if you look at the old town, they're almost completely pedestrianized. That's the place where people want to go to spend their money. So people are willing to drive there, park, and then arrive at this amazing place and destination where they can then spend their time and spend their money. So for example, if you know Lindsay were city councilor, she says, I want people to go to this Westwood Boulevard and spend money. Now I tell them, then you got to restrict cars as much as possible because you can either choose one or two, several things. You can make it efficient for throughput traffic, or you can make it a great place to be and to play and to spend money. I can't do, I'll admit something. I don't know how to do that. I don't think any transportation engineer knows how to make a place a great place to be for spending money, but also make it efficient for throughput traffic. It's not possible.
Right.
So it's really a choice of like, well, hey, if you want people a revitalized shopping district, you need to make it more pleasant to be in. Like, you know, why would somebody drive down Westwood Boulevard, get stuck in traffic, fight to find street parking, just to dash inside of a store for 5 minutes, buy what they need, and then leave when they could just do it online? Like if you think about it, like that's what I just described was a miserable experience. But if you can make it where they could park somewhere on the outside, walk down a beautiful street surrounded by greenery, have a variety of choices, not have to deal with traffic at all, meet somebody for a cup of coffee. That's something that online retail can't provide. It's the actual physical location itself. And that's really the only way I believe that, you know, shopping district areas are ever going to be able to compete with online retail is by leveraging the only asset and advantage they have over online retail, which is their actual physical location. Make your place and your shop as nice of a place to be as possible.
Let me reiterate this idea that Fountain is one lane just east of where we're talking about, and it tees into the city of West Hollywood on the west side, which is a walkable city. So this 1.5 mile, 2 mile stretch of Fountain is 4 lanes, 2 lanes in either direction, and it is one of the worst. There you go. That's where it tees into La Cienega.
But you can even see it from satellite views. Look here, where are cars backing up?
Right,
Not the road. It's at this intersection right here.
right.
Yeah, there you
And
go.
so we are in a discussion now, and the neighbors who don't live on Fountain, but the neighbors who travel on Fountain are up in arms about this idea that we would go from 2 lanes down to 1 lane. They're convinced that that will mean much longer, commute times and much more traffic jams.
Well, that would only be the case if you made the approach to the intersection itself at La Cienega 1 lane. But so long as you're providing enough storage space at the intersection of Fountain and La Cienega, it shouldn't.
Right, right. And if you move your cursor to my right, further east, you'll see how the street is. And it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
one of those
And
streets that is wide in one area and then narrow in the next.
yeah, and like this is a perfect example of intersection. So North Olive Drive and Fountain Avenue. If Fountain Avenue is just a single lane, why on earth would you need this intersection right here? If you only have to if the cars on North Olive Avenue only have to cross a single lane of traffic, or they want
Right,
to turn left, well, if they just have 1 lane to contain with you, you don't even need this signal anymore. And
right.
then you can then you're shaving multiple minutes off the commute. Like imagine Fountain Avenue, 1 lane in every direction. How many of these intersections could you get rid of? You could get rid of the North Olive. You could get rid of where's the next one? You
Maybe
could get
Crescent
rid of
Heights, which
North Sweetser. Yeah.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is
Switzer you
really,
don't need, right?
You
this
need
is
traffic.
so mind-blowing because first of all, it opens up lanes for bikes and BRTs on every, not every street, but so many streets. But it's also, Stefan, just to drill down on this one more time, it feels like what the real villain in the story is the intersections just slow you down so much that you want to minimize them. And basically, 1 lane is the way to minimize them because that allows you to cross. But there's a double issue that you also have complexity at the intersection that slows people down. Am I saying that right?
Yes, but it also assumes that your end goal is flow. It doesn't necessarily have to be that your end goal is flow.
Okay, so we're actually talking about two completely different things. One is the 1 lane gets rid of the intersections and it just flat out makes it faster or doesn't make it slower. And the second issue is we need to figure out, you have to choose, is your street a road or a street? Is it throughput and flow, or is it a destination for shopping and living?
Yeah, and that big level decision you just talked about, that's going to determine everything else. And that's why I always ask people, what do you want? I can help you with one of them, but I can't do 2 or 3 things at the same time. I'm not a magician.
Is there a metaphor for that? I always like to talk about smoking and non-smoking sections, that we're all just sitting and smoking when you're on an airplane.
Yeah, right.
Or
Yeah,
a small
yeah.
restaurant. Is there a metaphor you like to use that these things just don't go together?
I kind of like saying like you want free parking and abundant parking and convenient parking. So for
Right.
example, like in a great shopping district, well, if you have like 5 parking spaces, you don't have enough parking for everybody and it can't be free. It doesn't exist. Like you can't have convenient, free, and abundant parking all at the same time.
You got to
But,
choose.
Or how
maybe just
about
to give
you?
you a very quick example of what I'm talking about. So if you were to look on my screen here at Havenhurst Drive,
Mhm. Yeah,
this is a road, this is a street that doesn't have to be for flow, because if you look at what's surrounded, there are a bunch of buildings here. So you could say, hey, Havenhurst Drive is all about providing access to these homes here. So then you could just start out by saying, okay, access is our most important role we want to fulfill right here. And then, yeah, you don't even have to concern yourself with flow, because you're not going to get much traffic here to begin with. And then,
and I might add that
what
a
about
lot of those apartments on Havenhurst are beautiful old LA, from the 50s and 60s, beautiful apartment buildings, and that's a really nice place to live. And you don't
Yeah.
want speeding cars on Havenhurst.
Exactly.
Does
But that's a
that
completely different conversation. So we're no longer talking about flow, we're talking about access. So the question is, how do we make this as accessible as possible for people who want to stay here? And then it's like we want to reduce traffic on here. We want to push traffic away, and we want to slow traffic down. So instead of using asphalt, which is a material you want to use to make fast travel comfortable, maybe you want to choose a material that makes fast travel uncomfortable. And then you can talk about using bricks or tiles or something like that.
Before we end, Stefan, I wonder if you could talk quickly about what's an American doing in the Netherlands as a traffic engineer. Usually it's the other way around. The traffic engineers from the Netherlands come to America.
Yeah, I was studying civil engineering at Sac State, and like literally virtually every program in the U.S. When you get into transportation engineering, it's a sub-branch of civil engineering. And I was really kind of interested in how transportation engineering had a lot of different aspects to it. So it had this economic aspect, it had this social science aspect that had to do with the behavior of people. I found it more interesting because you look at these other fields, kind of like structures or geotechnical, where everything it's very much a hard science. Everything's already been figured out with all these formulas. And I found transportation engineering very interesting because it kind of seemed to dabble and overlap with all these other fields. And what further interested me as I entered the field more as a student, I thought, we don't have this stuff figured out very well because I'm reading these things in this book, and it's like I'm getting the sense of like we don't really know what we're quite doing here, which is quite interesting because it's like, hey, well, there's still quite a lot of things to figure out here. And also being half German, I've been to Europe many times, and I would read about these things that this book would claim were impossible. And I would say, well, that's not right. Last summer I saw the perfect counterexample to this thing that this traffic engineering book talks about. So that was kind of how I got introduced to it. And then when I started working, I got frustrated. I was working in the consulting world, and I got kind of fed up very quickly. And when you don't have much to do during your day job and you're a frustrated transportation engineer, what do? You start looking up information about the Netherlands to get inspiration because you start learning about what are the best places in the world for good mobility design. And I got this idea in my head. I thought, okay, I want to become a really good transportation engineer. I don't really think I can learn enough to be one in the US. What if I just go over there because I already have a German passport? So when COVID came around, I kind of had this perfect opportunity because everybody started working from home. And I read through my company's like kind of work policy, and I didn't see any language in there that said you're not allowed to change countries. So I kind of did the whole like ask for forgiveness, not for permission thing. And I just moved my home to the Netherlands during COVID while everyone was working from home, and I just didn't tell anybody. And
Great.
then
Well,
I've been here ever since.
I hope you think about coming back and sharing your experiences that you've learned there in Harlem and in the Netherlands and sharing them more, not only on Bike Talk, but in cities all over America, because we need your kind of expertise. Stefan,
Yeah, I'd be very interested to.
how can people find your channel and see some of your videos?
Yeah, so on YouTube, if you just look up Build the Lanes, that's my YouTube channel. I've put up, I think, 10 or 15 videos by now. And I also am on LinkedIn. I tend to write quite a lot, so you can also follow me personally on LinkedIn as well. And I have a couple of articles published. If you look up America Has No Transportation Engineers, for example, you can read that article on Next City. So Next City, LinkedIn, and YouTube, you can find me.
Right. Stefan Burr, thanks very much for coming on Bike Talk. Lindsay, it's always great to see you. And Sully, I'm glad that we met, and thanks for adding to the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.